Hello, I'm Brian Check with the Center for the Advancement of the Steady State Economy, or CASSE. And it's my great pleasure to host this week's CACOR presentation. CACOR is the Canadian Association for the Club of Rome, and we consider them to be a close ally of CASSE. We feel that they're one of the most valuable, they definitely have the most valuable YouTube channel out there that's focused on limits to growth and the steady state economy by implication, if not explicitly, a lot of times. And I just learned today that this is the 50th anniversary year of CACOR. It's the 20th anniversary of CASSE. So together we've got about 70 years of some real sustainability work. So our guest speaker today is Dave Rollo. Dave is a scientist, a politician, and a farmer. In particular, he served as a plant scientist at the University of Indiana from 1995 to 2011. And that provided him very keen insights to the organic farming operation that he started up with his wife, Heather, in 2011. And meanwhile, Dave took an interest in municipal politics, and he was elected to the Bloomington, Indiana City Council in 2003. And he must have done a lot of things right because he's been on that city council ever since. He served as the president of the council for 2 different terms. And he's also served on the Bloomington Environmental Advisory Council, the Sustainability Commission, and the Climate Action and Resilience Committee. Now I'll tell you how Dave is involved with CASSE and then this talk. So at CASSE, we started to notice a few years ago that although debates about economic growth, whether there's a limit to growth, whether there's a conflict between growth and various other things, those debates are really dead at the national level. They're just, they're not allowed in the civil service, for example, where I was for some time. And they hardly ever appear even in the national media. It's pretty much the same thing at the state level of politics. However, at the county level, it is very common to see debates about growth, whether there should be further growth in this or that county. It's one of the most common themes in some of the county level newspapers. So at that point, we got some funding to start up a project. It's part of our policy program at CASSE. And this project is called the Keep Our Counties Great campaign. If you see the slide here, you'll see the word keep is italicized because we definitely always juxtapose ourselves to this idea of a mega idea of make America or North America great again. We say it's been great. It's lost some of the greatness. And guess why? It's because that GDP bulldozer at the door. And so if you're in a county where you look out the window and you like what you see and you want to keep it great, well, then get the right agenda in mind. You want to stop that GDP bulldozer from messing it up further. So that is the project that's most relevant for today's talk. And we had the great fortune of hiring Dave with his outstanding background for this to head up the Keep Our Counties Great program. Okay, Dave, over to you.
Thank you, Brian. It's a great pleasure to be with everybody today. I appreciate the opportunity. I'm Dave Rollo. I'm a policy specialist, as Brian said, with CASSE, which is the Keep Our Counties Great campaign. And the campaign is is one of several components of our policy program at CASSE. The campaign is aligned with our mission, which is to advance the steady state economy and oppose to a growth economy with stabilized population and consumption, as a policy goal with widespread public support. The campaign is to promote public policies conducive to steady state economy at the county level in the USA and Canada. The primary instrument for reform is the County Comprehensive Plan, which is the guiding document for county planning. And I'll refer to that later on in the talk. This effort may also concern municipal policies, cities within counties, but the primary focus is on county jurisdiction. And my work consists of policy analysis and development with communication, networking with groups like your own, professional organizations, and governments. So my background is in biology with 20 years of laboratory research at Indiana University and with experience in local public policy. I've been civically active in politics for about 30 years now, and I'm currently completing my 22nd year in elected office, where I've served on the Bloomington City Council in Bloomington, Indiana. The Keep Our Counties Great campaign placed a special emphasis on keep, as Brian said, as many counties throughout the US and Canada have already have the qualities of greatness, but are threatened, ironically, by what is often promoted as promising greatness. That is further growth in economic output, GDP, growth in population, and the attendant growth in spatial growth in land development. Those promoting growth will tell you that this landscape that I'm showing here should be converted to this type of landscape to expand well-being in your community. Some may dissent to this. I certainly have. But this attitude is so prevalent, it has become accepted as either desirable or inevitable. But many people do experience with regret, and we need to underscore that this is not an inevitable outcome. So let's see what we can do to push back. Here's what I'll cover today, which is we'll take a stab at understanding a steady state economy and near-term limits. We'll focus on why the local is important and the strategy behind this. We'll talk about the comprehensive plan, which I've mentioned, and envisioning what a steady state comprehensive plan would look like. We'll touch on some other aspects of what a county can do, because there are other documents that are related to a comprehensive plan, but it's not exclusively a comprehensive plan. And then we will talk about some examples of great counties. So let's begin with some background on steady state economy and consideration of some near-term limits. There are different ways to describe the cost of growth. I often begin looking at the wide lens. So I suspect this figure or something like it will be completely familiar with your group. And I find it really an essential tool in making the case, especially at the Sustainability Commission or the Environmental Commission, where I remind people of this whenever I have the opportunity. So what is an economy? The human economy is a system of production and consumption activities that draw on natural resources and produce waste, and which the natural systems assimilate. The economy renders high-quality energy into degraded energy, which is waste heat, and natural resources into human artifacts that either results in degraded materials or are part of the waste stream, or hopefully are recycled, and then furthermore require more energy use to make them productive. Note that the most important feature of this diagram is that the economic system is contained in a subset parent system of the biosphere. The biosphere isn't growing, and so the scale of the economic system must be eventually limited by Earth's limits. The energy inputs into the human economy include today vast stores of stored solar energy in the form of fossil fuels, of course. They are a finite resource. and has much to do with the scale of the human footprint, why it is so large relative to the biosphere. They are finite, they're depleting, and their quality is diminishing as well. So another way to look at this is in an ecological context, where you see the economy scale is on one axis, time is on the other, and K is the carrying capacity, if you're familiar with ecology, in this case of the human economy. An economy has a feature of a steady growth rate. In the case of our global economy, it's averaging just over 2% per year for many decades now, which is an exponential function. Having this characteristic curve, in our case of the global economy, it has a doubling time of every 35 years. And it becomes unsustainable, of course, as it exceeds carrying capacity, or K. We are now exceeding that carrying capacity by all measures. In contrast, a steady state economy does not grow in this manner. It modulates, growing incrementally for a short time, then shrinking, but operating in a safe and sustainable fashion below the carrying capacity. So we can envision that we could achieve an optimum for human and natural system well-being, modulating around some optimum. This is, in fact, a sustainable economy in the true sense of sustainability. And an economy that relies on economic continual growth, by definition, is, of course, not sustainable. So be wary of oxymorons such as green growth or sustainable growth. I find reference to these quite often in local level in the various comprehensive plans and so forth. So many municipalities and counties are forward-thinking, and they've adopted an ethic of sustainability. So they're moving in the right direction. And frequently within their sustainability plans, it features this figure, which you're probably all familiar with, which is a Venn diagram of model of sustainability with three overlapping domains of environment, economy, and society, to recognize that sustainable development should integrate all three in policymaking, as they are all interconnected. But the problem is this model suffers from the problem of being unbounded. The case I'm making here is that if policymakers go forward with this idea of sustainability, and they have that mental model in mind, it does matter how they operate in the world and how they operate in terms of policy. So if we wish to change what we're seeking, then our models must comport with reality. While it's true that counties and cities are open systems, within the larger biosphere, they can import carrying capacity from elsewhere. But elsewhere is getting scarcer and scarcer, as we know, as each community expands their footprint beyond their own biocapacity and draws down their ecological reserve. So the biocapacity is the capacity of biologically productive area to generate an ongoing supply of renewable resources and absorb its wastes. So we've been experiencing, as you see in the lower diagram, a situation where the global footprint of humanity relative to the global biocapacity is overwhelming it. And this deficit of absorbing and exceeding ecological reserves is at the heart of the problem. So to recognize that that shift in mental models of sustainability requires viewing it as a nested model. And I make this case when I'm speaking to people locally, that if you're talking about sustainability, you really need to draw your attention to this model as opposed to the other, and viewing it as where the economy is a subset of society, which in turn operates within the biosphere or the environment below thresholds that exceed the productive or simulative capacity of that biosphere. As you probably know, you might have seen this diagram before. This is from the Stockholm Resilience Center, and it illustrates some examples of how we're exceeding global thresholds and damaging biospheric systems. This should inform the local as well as the state and federal governments in determining policy. So we see things like freshwater extraction, surface or aquifers, mass extinction is resulting from threats of habitat loss. We have novel entities such as organic pollutants and microplastics are growing in abundance and concentration. Ocean acidification, which is another outcome of high CO2 levels, is reaching threshold levels. And of course, this also illustrates climate change, which is the most recognized, even at the lower levels of policy in counties and cities. And there are policies that are being fashioned to address it. I see this in Bloomington as a response to CO2 concentration. We have reduction plans, mitigation plans, and so forth. But we need to see it as symptomatic of a larger problem, that is the growth of the human footprint, both in population and economic output. So what I've described in the preceding slides are the problems of reaching these planetary limits, but we can't simply relegate action to international agreements or national policy measures. Those are important to focus on, to be sure, and in fact, my colleague at CASSE, Daniel London, who spoke to you some months ago, has been working on policy on acts and bills at the federal level that would seek to transition us away from an economy focusing on increasing GDP. We at CASSE seek to work at multiple levels of governance. And at this time, especially given the political climate, we can expect that adoption of steady state legislation to be difficult. So working at the local level is extremely important to make a shift for communities to recognize that they can opt out of the growth imperative by recognizing that there are many costs to growth. A foundational book on the subject is Even Voters, which I'm sorry, I just showed. Better, Not Bigger, that shifts the emphasis away from quantitative growth toward qualitative development. So some of the costs of growth at the local level include, that he cites in his book, include environmental and ecological costs, monetary costs where full cost accounting does not occur, and cost to quality of life with expansion occurring in the built environment. So I note here a few of the ecological costs in loss of biocapacity. There's conversion, of course, of undeveloped land to human development, habitat fragmentation, which affects many other organisms. There's increasing energy and materials throughput locally, which of course increases the waste stream and waste production. And then we also have the lack of the reduction of and loss of productive farmland for the community. There are monetary costs, which involve things like increase in taxes because of building roads, schools, the utilities that have to be added onto. We have costs of public safety, government services, social services as communities grow. And then we have a loss as the expansion of the community occurs in natural services that have to be made up for by building artificial wetlands or somehow, ameliorating heat island effects and things of that sort because of the growth of communities. And then we have quality of life concerns, congestion, pollution, crime, and as communities expand, oftentimes you have reduced access to green spaces or green spaces of quality. So I'd like to draw your attention. I think I saw Dave Shreve in our audience today, which is wonderful. This is an example, an analysis that he conducted with Craig Evans, who is the principal investigator. And what they did was they evaluated the costs of development within Albemarle County, Virginia, and Charlottesville. And what they found is that the costs were indeed externalized for most types of development. In other words, for every dollar generated in revenue, the services required exceeded that dollar. The exceptions are commercial and industrial, but we could argue that as they grow, we're going to have growth in residential housing and so forth, which will probably counter or displace that increase in revenue. So let's go now to why focusing on the local is important. Brian Scheck talked about this a little bit, and why it's a good strategy to look at the local when we are critiquing and pushing back against the growth paradigm. So federal governments and state governments, as Brian mentioned, are much less likely to respond to these arguments, in part because they've been captured by economic interests. And so as you go further up the scale of governance, you have more and more interest and more influence by economic interests who have an interest in growth for profit. Growth debates are rare at the national or state level, but quite often happen at the local municipal level because people experience the growth, they experience the negative externalities, and so they more often are likely to participate in that sphere. Because citizens are closer to local governance, they can affect change by actually being present, by attending meetings, forming local groups, joining boards and commissions, and running for office, for instance. Furthermore, the zoning codes, land use overlays, protection of green space, urban growth boundaries are tools that limit growth and are within the realm of local governance. So state governments often turn these abilities over to local municipalities or counties in order to govern the areas within their domain. And importantly, land use policies are a fundamental aspect of county planning. So the comprehensive plan, formerly called master plan or growth policies plan, they have been established to guide growth in the past. They typically refer to them still as desirable or benign, but they are often up for renewal or amending, and currently modern growth policy plans, or I should say comprehensive plans, are much more multifaceted and are opportunities for us to critique and to push against growth. So one of the most important, of course, as I've already mentioned, is the comprehensive plan. And so the comprehensive plan, let's review what it is, talk about how we can amend it so that it reflects what a steady state plan would consist of. Comprehensive plans are the guiding document for counties or municipalities. They govern things like land use, zoning, the form and scale of the built environment. They are responsible for the roads planning and the transportation options, whether it's public transportation or alternative transportation like biking or pedestrian trails. The comprehensive plan covers parks, green spaces, farms, and wetlands within the land use recommendations. It often now directs attention to climate policies. It, of course, includes economic priorities, which could be fashioned to be a steady state policy. And it also directs attention to investments in social capital, housing priorities, and involves things like culture and identity. These plans typically have a 20-year outlook, and so they look forward. And as we can see here, Imagine Greeley is the comprehensive plan of Greeley, Colorado, and it is imagining its future in this plan. Importantly, these plans are community derived if they're done in the right way. And so by definition, involve community participation. And that's an avenue for change. So why is the comprehensive plan important? It is used by a multitude of bodies within the county or the city in which it operates. It involves the administration, whether it's the mayor of a city or the county commissioners. It involves the city or county departments. It involves, of course, the planners who are responsible for the typical development that occurs within a community. It is part of the interest of the development community in the private development community in the county. And of course, it draws the attention of economic development entities, such as the Chamber of Commerce or other economic development commissions. The legislative body of the county or the city, the council, either the county or the city council, essentially are very intimately involved within the comprehensive plan, both forming the comprehensive plan, but also utilizing it in decision making. And then it also is an important guiding document for the Plan Commission, which is involved in reviewing development petitions, various boards and commissions, some of which I've mentioned, for instance, the Environmental Commission of the city, or the Board of Zoning Appeals, which is a way in which people appeal decisions that involve zoning. And of course, the media attends to it and it's of interest in the developmental process as it's being reported by the local media. So this is a basic form of the modern comprehensive plan. It involves a vision statement, which establishes the long-term aspirations of the community. This is an important aspect. As I showed you, the Greeley Comprehensive Plan imagines its future. And the topics and goals that are derived from the vision statement have to be in alignment with that. So these are often formed as chapters within the comprehensive plan, following the vision statement. And then policies that are specific directions on how goals are to be achieved are then the next layer that follows from the topics and goals. So again, if we're envisioning true sustainability, we want to maintain and enhance residents' quality of life while limiting impacts on natural systems. So within that vision statement, it could actually explicitly challenge the growth narrative. And I'll give you an example, because this is one that I'm familiar with, which is in the 2018 comprehensive plan of the city of Bloomington. And my colleague, Andy Ruff, who is a council member on the city council, and I sponsored the changes that I'll read to you. The Bloomington Comprehensive Plan addresses not merely the physical growth of our community, but recognizes the variety of human and natural systems interactions necessary to achieve a sustainable community with a high quality of life for our residents. We acknowledge that healthy natural systems are the foundation for flourishing human societies, and globally, the scale of human impact is undermining this foundation. And we must reverse the course of environmental degradation to ensure a livable future. Our community has resolved to do our share to protect the biosphere, and critical to this protection is recognizing that infinite growth is neither possible nor desirable in a finite world. To track our community's progress towards greater sustainability and resilience, we require measures of success that are inclusive of environmental, social, and economic well-being sustainability. Measures community resilience should replace inadequate progress measures based on aggregate growth and conversion of our natural world to built capital and corresponding increases in resources and energy. So in other words, what we placed within our vision statement is a recognition of limits as per the nested model of sustainability. So let's look at some the topics and goals that would follow on a vision statement that would be in alignment with a steady state comprehensive plan. These would typically form chapters, and I've listed a few here that would be in alignment. To preserve natural capital would be one. To build social capital would be another. The land use should be one of limiting development. We need, especially with climate change and the depletion of our fossil energy, we need low energy use transportation options. We need a high quality public works. That's what people expect in their community. And this is part of the reason why we want to limit development, because it often is always playing catch up, as I referred to earlier, where we often overextend the public works of the city. And then we want a sustainable economics that focuses on things like real localization, which is doing more locally within our community for our own economy instead of imports. So let's then look at what policies might derive. They're specific to a chapter on the preserving natural capital. So we would certainly consider biocapacity of the county to preserve and enhance the biocapacity of our jurisdiction, limiting human development and impact while enhancing human quality of life, health, and well-being. There are mutually supportive activities and fundamental to our guiding policy. So biocapacity would deserve a special place. Habitat protection, to utilize, how would we go about it? We would utilize mapping county green space and environmentally sensitive areas to protect important habitat. And then we would go about purchasing land or using conservation easements to restrict areas that are particularly sensitive. We would assess development impacts, assessing ecological services for the community to determine present and future impacts of development within the county as a way of internalizing costs for the community, as well as impact fees. So applying growth impact assessment to help set impact fees for future development is a way in which developers can't then pass those costs on to the community. We would focus on farmland protection as part of our biocapacity, and we would implement zoning changes then and provide incentives for protecting farmland against development pressures. And hopefully we would actually, along with biocapacity, we would seek to establish a measure on our ecological footprint as a community. So we would have an economic footprint analysis of the county as a benchmark to frame policy decisions to reduce the community's ecological footprint or maintain our current impact over time. So let's take a look at a couple other examples of what those topics and goals would be within a steady state comprehensive plan. I picked land use next because that's very much associated with preserving our natural capital, and it involves limiting development. It's one of the most important aspects of what a comprehensive plan does is evaluating and guiding land use. So we would do something like implement concurrency and internalizing costs, as I've said before. So these are often externalized onto the city or the public. And what we would do is seek to internalize those costs by implementing, among other things, concurrency. That is to say that we would have all of the needs of the current community met before we would even consider expanding. And then the cost of any added capacity would be then borne by the developer and not passed on to existing residents. We would seek to establish an urban service boundary. This has been utilized in a number of communities. One of the earliest ones was in Lexington, Kentucky, to preserve their horse country. But it's used in a number of places. It was used in Boulder, Colorado, for instance, Portland, Oregon, to establish urban services boundaries based on an interlocal agreement you could have between city and county that would limit development by capping growth within the municipal borders of towns or villages or cities within the county. We would certainly try to expand conservation areas. So we could do that by government working with local land trusts or conservation groups the County Environmental Commission could play a lead role in this, and we could continue to expand our county's natural land holdings through development of conservation easements and to safeguard ecological services and habitat. We would define rural preservation areas. So we would aim to preserve farmland against development by allowing only low density add-ons to existing structures, for instance, or reducing the allowance of the built environment to 1 unit per 10 or 1 unit per 25 acres. And we would preserve compact form within the communities that already exists. So to concentrate the gray infrastructure, which is a cost savings, we would seek to densify if we were going to develop, if we needed to develop, we would densify our existing communities as opposed to sprawling out into the county. Okay. So let's cover one more, because of time, let's cover one more chapter involving topics and goals. And this is our economic development. We would concentrate on local business. Instead of trying to attract employees from outside the community, our county economic and sustainable development department would prioritize supporting local businesses as a driver of county prosperity through grants or through tax abatements and so forth. We would focus on import substitution, which is an idea to essentially do within our community what we can rather than import goods from outside. So this is a way in which we could develop, retain wealth in our community, and we would hope that we could have a report on that, a report on income substitution for opportunities for substituting goods, imported goods with sustainable, locally produced products, such as food, fiber, and lumber. And this is particularly important for food. Our economic and sustainable development department would be focused on value adding to existing businesses to have them expand what they produce and locally produced. And we would focus on a circular economy, one that is an economy of reuse, recycling, repair, and refurbishing of materials instead of the use economy, which passes through to the landfill. And as I said, we would focus on our food systems and concurrently with farmland preservation. We would establish things like food hubs and farm stops where we would invest public funds to help develop a local food economy. And this is very important to farmers, and I know this very well since I've been one for some time, providing storage and processing facilities and space that could be used, as well as local food markets, to essentially to value add to farm products and for storage and so forth. And we would also help to expand markets. So these are examples of the chapters within the comprehensive plan, but I want to say that this isn't exclusive of the comprehensive plan in terms of what a county can do in terms of moving toward a steady state. There are lots of other additional plans and analyses that are complementary, and those would be drawn on by the comprehensive plan. So some of these exist in Bloomington, for instance, or in Monroe County, where I reside. They're called action plans, and they describe how to achieve essentially a certain goal. We have a sustainability action plan that's aligned within the nested model of sustainability in our community. We have a climate action plan where we strive to get to net zero as a community by 2050. So it outlines a goal of carbon neutrality through 3 means, either generation of energy locally, mostly through solar panels in our community, but also commitment to energy conservation. Most of our buildings are, I sponsored a LEED Silver green building ordinance which has now been exceeded by City Hall and is now LEED Gold, which is a architectural, essentially, evaluation of the status of sustainability. So we can do a lot for energy conservation, and then we can think of ways to develop carbon sinks in the community, most likely planting trees or planting prairie systems, but also maybe things like biochar. A corollary to the climate action is to prepare for an energy transition, because we know that energy costs are going to be higher in the future. We might have, as depletion proceeds, we may have times where we have shortages of energy, and so we need to reduce our demand for imported energy, as in the context of a declining global energy system production. We have a local food action plan, which offers a vision for expanding the local food economy. And this protects farmland, provides employment, and also provides for county food security as well. And an import substitution as a means to build local wealth action plan could be one that describes a strategy for reducing our community's impact on while building economic diversity and community resilience by producing locally produced goods. We would hope that there would be a county resolution, and I'm working toward one in my community as a signatory to CASSE's position statement on economic growth. We would have implemented, hopefully, a systems thinking instead of a siloed comprehensive planning. We have a systems thinking document, but much of our thinking is siloed, and we can remedy that by a systems thinking approach. And I gave an example that this could be authored by the Sustainability Commission and accepted by the county commissioners. We need, of course, tools like mapping green space and environmentally sensitive areas using GIS so that we can protect against fragmentation and maintain natural wildlife corridors and so forth. We need growth impact assessments, that is calculating the costs of further development to our counties, towns, and villages. And this is something that has been employed by some certain counties. And then we could have a report, as I said, on import substitution, prepared by our County Economic Development Commission, which would explore ways in which we could develop our own economy to prevent economic leakage and recirculate money within our community. A couple of action plans that I think are very important are ones that focus on things like assessing ecological services for the community. And this is a pie chart that illustrates the types of ecosystem services that are important, but often not considered within a county: the supporting, the provisioning, the cultural, and the regulating ecosystem services that nature provides us for free. And if it didn't provide us certain things for free, like clean water, it's going to cost us a great deal in order to supplant that. So this is a very important document that counties should be focused on, as well as their comprehensive plan. And as I've already alluded to, the planning department of the county should assess an ecological footprint analysis. And we're hoping to assist at CASSE with that effort. An analysis for our carrying capacity and our current impact on our local biocapacity. So let me finish with a couple of examples of great counties. We have a blog at CASSE. You can find it at steadystate.org and at the following URL. And I, as well as my colleagues at CASSE, we write articles, and they are issued weekly. My articles are focused on keeping counties great. And I've covered a number of counties. You can find them there. You can find articles about them there. One county I explored was Rappahannock County, which is in Virginia. It is an amazing place. It has a preservation ethic of the county commissioners that is practically unmatched. It has as its guiding vision of its document, comprehensive document, a principles page where 6 out of the 10 principles focus on conservation. It is a very stringent land use code, and it seeks to limit development within very narrowly defined boundaries of towns and villages within the county. It also has in 90% of the county, only allows 1 unit per 25 acres of development. And it has a high level of civic involvement as well. The map here illustrates, it's derived from the Piedmont Environmental Council, which is a local environmental group that has protected so far 20% of the land within the county, and those are shown there by the green conservation easements. And the easements have been growing year by year, and they are focused on expanding those over time. The Rappahannock County also has a wonderful aspect to it, and that is it has part of the Shenandoah National Park on its very western border, which is an exceptional, beautiful place. So here is an example of what the county has done in terms of limiting growth. Its GDP by year for the past, this covers 6 years, it indicates, as I said, a modulating GDP over time. And the population has remained essentially further back than 1970, has remained under 8,000 people. Okay, I'll turn now to, I don't know why there's hash marks on my slides, but where that's coming from. So let's turn now to another county. This is Bayfield County in Wisconsin. This is quite an amazing place as well. The local planners are fully on board with conservation. The county is comprised mostly of federal, state, and county land, mostly forested. And in fact, the county owns and manages about 170,000 acres of forest within the county. They've registered their forests. About 90% of their forests are registered in a carbon offset program. And they're partially managed in collaboration with the Chippewa tribe, which has a reservation on the very northern tip of the county. It utilizes a systems approach. So as I've said, it's not siloized in its thinking. It's looking at things as a complex adaptive system where there are interactions between the different aspects of the county, different departments and so forth, different priorities. And similarly to Rappahannock County, it has a modulating GDP over time and a fairly low populated county with a constant or near constant population. So you can read more about these counties at our Steady State Herald blog. And as I've said, here are the CASSE programs and projects that we have. And I've described our KEEP, our County's Great campaign, which is part of our policy program there. We have an editorial program, communications program, policy program, outreach program, development program, and an administration program. And that is our website for CASSE. And I'm going to turn it back over to you, Brian. Thank you.
All right. Well, thank you so much, Dave. That was great. You don't see too many county-focused presentations on the steady state movement, so it's really refreshing. We had a number of really great comments in the chat room, and I may actually take the liberty of trying to convert a few of those comments into questions. There were some questions per se, though, and first of all, I'd like to put Peter McKinnon on deck to ask his question, but I want to start with probably the most straightforward question out there, which was by Richard Vanderjack. And the question was, is conversion to renewable energy part of the plan?
Absolutely. It is part of the plan. I can speak certainly to my neck of the woods, which is in Bloomington, Indiana, where we have a program for solar conversion. We put solar panels on all of our rooftops. So all of our civic buildings have solar panels, schools have solar panels, and we passed cost savings on to local residents. And so we've been cost sharing and buying those in bulk, and then passing the savings on to the local residents. So that could certainly be part of the program. I think a lot of communities are doing this now. And there are of course, there are other ways in which we can supply or reduce our carbon footprint through conservation, as I've mentioned, or we can also reduce our carbon output through capture. So those are all part of our program and part of many communities. For instance, Tompkins County, New York, did an article, and they're very far ahead on this. And they have a very friendly state government that's assisting them. So it can help you at a municipal or county level to have a state government that's in step with you.
Yeah, I guess part of that question was conversion to community microgrids.
Yeah.
Right? So
yeah,
that's part of it. And the other one is, of course, conversion to electric vehicles.
Yep.
So, yeah, is that part of the plan?
Yes. Where oftentimes when you're looking at counties, it depends upon home rule, what communities can do for themselves. But in Monroe County, where I live in Indiana, we have the ability to establish our own electric utility. And so that's been explored over time. I'm not familiar with any examples, but it's something that I think that communities need to consider doing. So it's definitely advisable in terms of electric cars. Yes, those would be part of the infrastructure. Putting up recharging stations. We have them in various places in Monroe County where it can be accessed by the public. So our parking garages, for instance, now have installations, and our outdoor parking has installations for recharge stations as well.
Perfect. Is CASSE against immigration? It's enough the top, like it's maybe off topic. I'm not sure. I just wondered if that's part of the policy.
Brian, would you like to answer that?
Yeah, so well, that's quite a jump, but obviously it's very related to a lot of county dynamics, and we have what I would consider a unique approach to immigration that I thank you for asking the question, because when people hear about it, they across the board say that makes sense. And we say that let's start with the USA, okay? That'll be easiest for me to describe this approach through. So the US has an issue, especially at the southern border, with unsustainable rates of immigration. And our approach is that to establish a steady state economy in the United States, the US is going to have to tighten the borders, especially that one. However, we say that it should not. The US should not actually commence doing that, especially in the cases of legal immigration, until it at least simultaneously announces to the world that we're getting off that growth path and moving toward the steady state economy. And that's what our Steady State Economy Act, the federal part of our policy program, is all about, is that transition from the growth path to a steady state. So then all of a sudden it changes the whole geopolitical context, because the US can also say, world, we recognize that to establish this steady state economy, the top criterion is stabilizing population. I mean, it's all about population times per capita consumption.
Mhm.
So as part of our bill on that part of the Steady State Economy Act to stabilize immigration, it's about stabilizing the size of the economy and the so-called native birth rate, the native growth rate of current citizenry in the US is less than replacement. So we need some immigration if we want to stabilize the size of the population. And the bill to make that happen also includes what do we call it? The Aid in Place Fund, where some of the savings from dealing with over immigration and those programs and so on, and as well as other sources of revenue, are devoted to assisting the peoples in those countries where there truly are such dire conditions. In many cases, we're starting to take on climate refugees. And so we need to help with that, to help people have a better life where they are, so they won't need to immigrate as bad. That's our approach.
Could I just follow up and say that, of course I agree. I'm agreeing with Brian and going back to the ecologist Howard Odom's, impact equals population times affluence times technology. We have to work on all of those. And so we have to stabilize population, and we have to utilize right technologies, especially if they can conserve energy and so forth, reduce carbon. But we also need to work on the affluence, which is, I think, part of comprehensive plans locally. And that is to say that if you can provide services for people, for instance, that they don't need personal transport, if they can use public transport, they not only save money, but, in the sense that they don't seem to be as affluent, but they're going to be saving money, and they're going to be able to utilize public transportation as opposed to having a car, having to provide fuel, having to provide insurance and so forth. So there are ways in which we can direct our attention, I think, through comprehensive plans at the affluence aspect of the equation.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. Thanks, Richard. I think we're going to have quite a few questions coming up now. I actually want to put Art Hunter on deck, but I would also like to say that we need to try to keep these to questions per se, under like 30-second to elaborate and give Dave at most 2-3 minutes at the most, because otherwise we're not going to have time to get many into the recorded section of the Q&A. So Peter's question pertained to technological progress and renewable resources. He says, if an economy is in steady state, how does it handle innovation on the one hand and removing what it replaces without growth or shrinkage on the other hand? It's a two-part question.
Yes. Well, I would say that, again, it's we have to focus on right technologies. I mean, I think a lot of technologies that we're utilizing are ones where it's just simply it's growing our ecological footprint, but there are right technologies that I think that can offer savings in terms of money and cost and of course impact, carbon, energy, and so forth. And as those become available, yes, but we would switch to them, because ultimately whatever mean is a reduction in our impact. So if I'm understanding the question correctly, I think it's going to have a net benefit, neutral or net benefit, and hopefully a benefit as we conserve. So, Brian, do you have anything that
Well,
you could offer
the
on that?
only thing I'd add is that, Peter, that technological progress isn't manna from heaven. You know, it's linked at the hip with GDP growth based on current levels of technology. So we're not techno optimists at CASSE by any means. We say let's take the technology we have and try to focus that on stabilizing the size of the economy.
Well, just a few minutes ago with your last question, David, and thank you for your presentation, by the way, very interesting. Your question in discussion with Richard, you were talking about basically a transition in the internal combustion engine. So going from what we have today to electric vehicles. Not everyone's in a community is going to be able to afford that transition in a simple, say, 5-year time frame. So it was that kind of thing I was trying to get at. I mean, innovation is, of course, at the core of our, yes, our economic growth for sure, but also our knowledge and so forth of things. And so how do we, if we're going to have a sort of a sustainable environment, how do we deal with the new and embrace it, i.e. through innovation, while retiring the things that we feel are a drag on that, ability to be a steady state? That was really what the essence of my question was. And I suspect there's no specific answer yet, but I think that this is a challenging issue. And I also deal a lot in smart city work, and your Stockholm material was also a topic that I've given talks to here at CACOR. So thank you for your presentation. And I suspect you haven't got an answer, but please, if you have a comment, I'd welcome it.
Well, I think in terms of the type of regulation of the market that's required in terms of either mandates or in terms of incentives, I think that's going to come from higher levels. We could offer things at a local level to some extent. A lot of the policy that I think would help make a transition to a steady state would be things related to, I mean, one thing is certainly related to the form of transportation that we're using. And so in our neck of the woods in Bloomington, we put a very high priority on public transportation, on creating trail networks, on creating compact form, creating nodes where people can walk or access goods and services very locally, which of course people in Europe have been doing for centuries, but we're trying to retrofit essentially our communities to do so. We charge for parking, for instance, which we didn't used to. Used to be free parking, but there is no such thing as free parking. And so that incentivizes certain behaviors, for people to utilize public transportation. Communities could adhere to not expanding road systems, for instance, utilizing only the roads that they have in maintenance purposes and things like that. And that would help steer things toward either less car use or to using public or alternate transportation, or it would incentivize living locally to your, more compactly. And so those are certain things that we could do as a community. I think the transition to electric vehicles, it's certainly on its way. There's problems with that related to obviously mining lithium and various things like that, but we're going to have to electrify. And we've got to get away from liquid fuels because they're going to be scarcer and they're going to be less and less economic because the cost of them are increasing as we go deeper in the ocean to get them, or we're fracking at a continual basis to get the liquid fuels that we need. So some of this is going to come naturally, some of it is going to be at a higher federal or state level, and then some of it is going to be what we can do locally. And
thank you. I might just suggest there's one place there is free parking, and that's in Monopoly.
That's right.
All right, I think we have Art up next, and then I'm actually gonna do a little twist on the normal process here and convert a couple comments to a question or two. But Art has a great question about the calculated in GDP in national income accounting part of the economy.
Well, yeah, my concern is those activities which are under the radar. For example, the bartering system or micro agriculture where you're often growing your own food. And I mean, these are all good things, but I take a look at the Bayfield County example you put forward. It was measured in dollars, in GDP. And there's a lot of economic activity that is below the radar and never makes it to the dollar stage. How do you account for that? And I might add as well that in the energy front, there's, you know, geothermal energy that is freely available, but it's offsetting, of course, fossil fuels. Which also brings up the, you know, the related issue, and that is, what do you, because your modeling and your technique, can you export? I can see reducing a footprint, but typically you can export as well. You can export excess energy. How do you handle that?
It's a lot to unpack there. So with regard to activities that aren't accounted for, I mean, of course, GDP is an insufficient and a kind of a crude measure to some degree, and it doesn't account for things like quality of life. So we should really be looking at quality of life measures to understand what some of our practices are yielding in terms of whether people feel better off as a community. And many of the things that people say when they're in our comprehensive plan, when we were writing it, were things that you couldn't attribute a cost to it necessarily, or a value to it. Something, you know, it's you know, the ability to be civically active, or to know your neighbors, or to feel of course, feeling safe in a community, or feeling supported in a community, and things like that. So there are a lot of things. Now, in terms of bartering, or, you know, in our case, growing your own food is a very high priority. It's been a very high priority for me to encourage and allow people to. I mean, when I took office, there were prohibitions on growing food. You couldn't grow a garden in your front yard. You couldn't have chickens. You know, you couldn't do certain practices, and we've reversed those. So more and more urban agriculture is occurring, and I think that those are benefits. They could be estimated in some way. I think in sort of an economic GDP accounting scheme, but suffice to say, I think a lot of those things are unaccounted, and they're adding to public welfare. So, I'm not terribly concerned about that, but regarding the export of biocapacity, that's occurring, of course. If you look at the footprint analysis, you find that Asia, for instance, the world essentially went from having excess biocapacity relative to ecological surplus in the 1970s. So it crossed that threshold, and it did so in different parts of the world regionally at different times. Certainly that's occurring on a local basis. So Bayfield County has spare biocapacity that they're utilizing, but they're doing it in a wise fashion. So for instance, they're not just using their biocapacity in terms of cutting down the trees in order to increase wealth. They're using it as a carbon reserve. So in a sense, they're exporting their carbon capacity, biocapacity, to other communities. And I think that that's just sort of normally what's going to occur, because counties and cities are open systems. And so you're going to have that exchange occurring. But I think that communities should seek to maintain what biocapacity that they have remaining, and try to expand that over time and become more self-reliant. I hope that helps. Brian, do you have anything?
It does. Actually, that's good. It covers all all the questions I had. Thank you.
Okay, great.
Yeah, that's a good one. So Penelope Borche, you'd be on deck, but I'm going to try to sort of funnel a few of the comments. There's a bit of a theme in these comments by Ken Patton and Maxine Leichter and a couple others about the fact that a lot of counties and evidently even provinces, they're very constrained about how much limiting of growth they can do. And so, as you know, Dave, you've got Pennsylvania and California that shoved the growth down the county's throat. Is there any approach out there you see building for counties to push back? Any kind of like class action lawsuit of counties to say, hey, you can't tell us that we must do this and must do that?
I don't see that. I don't see any class action lawsuits happening, but that's a really interesting idea that that might be, there might be a judicial or a court remedy for that. Generally speaking, the courts have deferred to the structure that exists of states having priority over counties in terms of the domain of their jurisdiction and home rule and so forth. But there could be cases that are brought. I mean, we in Monroe County in Indiana, we have a very, we're a blue county in a red state, and so we've been sort of pushing the progressive envelope. And we, for instance, I was working on a plastic bag ban, and the state Chamber of Commerce got wind of it, and pretty soon legislation evolved at the state level to prohibit us from doing that. So I know this only too well, that states can be very difficult and restrictive to counties. And so it is, I think that the remedy probably is a political one, is to vote in the people that will, argue on your behalf at the State House and hopefully help you gain more freedom. I mean, there is a certain libertarian aspect to this, which should appeal to conservatives, to have, your own rights at a county municipal level expanded, not restricted.
Okay, well, yeah, that's going to be an increasing conflict, I think, in the coming decades. I think John Legg would be on deck. And also, there's a Derek Paul out there that has raised his hand, but and I guess he may have a question. If you can put that in the chat room, that would be best. That's how we're sort of prioritizing, because there's a lot of questions that they can't get to them all. So now it's Penelope.
Well, this is Fernando. I'm using my wife's PC for this. I'm in the community economic development field out of San Antonio,
Wonderful.
and the most prominent vehicle used throughout the state and across the United States in promoting an aggressive subsidized growth agenda is through what they call economic development. And so we need to address that concept, the way it's been used and abused, and where, like in San Antonio, I a few years ago asked the question, how do we define civic success? Well, it's through GDP metrics, and no one bothers to question that. It's just assumed that that's all we need to accomplish. So we need to address this pervasive idea that an aggressive subsidized growth agenda is all we need to be concerned about. And a corollary to that is the fact that whereas we have a visible environmental community, they're not interested in this discussion. I've given up approaching them. They're very narrow and limited in their scope. And so that's my little contribution at this time.
Uh,
Brian, could I step back for a moment and just address your previous question? Because it reminds me of, okay, so we were talking about state intervention or the state having undue, excessive power over communities in terms of their deciding their destiny. And this just reminds me of an example which is near where I live in Monroe County. It was in Tippecanoe County. I did a Steady State Herald blog article about it. And what the state economic development people wanted to do was to build a gigantic industrial park, 10,000 acres, in a county without water, even though it required up to 100 million gallons per day of water. And they bought the land, they began building, and then they sought to extend a pipeline over to an aquifer in a neighboring county, Tippecanoe County. And Tippecanoe County officials resisted. They passed resolutions, they had public hearings, they appealed to their state representatives and other representatives in government, but they also got a consortium of other counties in Indiana, and I think there are 20 now, to sign on, and we did in Monroe County, to oppose this. And it was enough to take it off the agenda for the time being during the governor's race, because they were frightened about the political ramifications of this. So it's possible that states could join together in common cause to try to change legislation or try to change policy at the state level. And that might be effective, so to join together.
Yeah. Okay, so we had a question. I'll find who's on deck while we're hearing the question from John Legg. John, you're muted, it looks like.
Unmute. Okay, how's that?
Good.
My question is trying to get past. I think it's probably that my age is showing. I'm not nimble enough to switch to the size of a town I lived in many years ago. Because right now, of course, here we are in Ottawa, and you're talking about Bloomington, and I looked it up quickly, and it's sort of 80,000 population. I guess my question is, do you get drawn into, that is to say, at the municipal level, discussions about the effect of federal policies? We seem to do that, but then we are the capital, and then we see how cynical some of the federal policies are. For example, oh yes, let's let in 500,000 new Canadians per year. Well, in a country that's in the neighborhood of 35 or 40 million people, that's a heck of a lot of new Canadians. And so you get this strange discussion about at the municipal level of federal policies. I think your discussions at the municipal level are probably more realistic, down to earth. I don't know. Do you have any comment on that sort of assumption, but question as well?
Well, we take on a lot of subjects. We're home of Indiana University. About half the population of Bloomington are students. So certainly we're aware of a lot of global trends and even geopolitical situations and so forth. In terms of federal policy, yes, it does matter to us. What we've been experiencing is less and less HUD funding over the years. We've been, in other words, social service funding has been dropping. And so we've had to compensate for that every year. You know, we're affected by national trends like any community. So we have a fairly high homeless population that we need to attend to. High, you know, who's people who are suffering from drug addiction and so forth, who need intervention other than incarceration. And so, and then we've been very, very proactive about climate. So we had our first evaluation. We signed on to the Kyoto Protocol back when it was one of the early documents. And then the Paris Agreement, the Seattle Mayor's Agreement was signed on to, and so forth. And we have a climate action plan. So we're doing things on various levels, but ultimately, what people are concerned about is, you know, are the roads serviceable? Is there police protection? Is there, you know, what is the quality of the water, et cetera? So those are things that are very, of course, where the rubber hits the road, where local governments really have to, you know, we're responsible for those. And what I find again and again, and is as progressive and as enlightened as Bloomington is, there's a real growth struggle there. And we are behind in terms of services relative to the needs. So we need to play catch up. And so I've been advising concurrency for years, and we're still not there. And the mayor is going forward with an annexation scheme right now, which I'm opposed to, for instance, and expanding the size of the city. So I don't know what exactly, if I think we're fairly realistic in terms of our outlook in Bloomington. And we're paying attention to a lot of things at once. And of course, those things are getting, as we said before we began, are getting more complicated and interesting every day. So.
Well, I'm inspired by the fact that you can keep your feet on the ground and at the same time listening to the larger issues, and at the same time try to put some common sense into the local issues. Because mind you, I truly am not in touch with the day-to-day discussions at City Hall here, but they have a particular problem because, well, this is the capital. But I find your example is a very good one to try to follow. Difficult though, because it's so you're not given any latitude whatsoever to just talk academically, because you're living the problems and you're responsible for them.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. I would just add that one benefit that I have, very significant one, of working at CASSE on this program, is that it acquaints me with what's happening in many other counties around the country. And I can utilize that because there are case studies of what people are doing right, and those can be utilized, and we don't have to reinvent the wheel. We can adopt them for ourselves. And so this is a very positive. I'm optimistic that local communities can do so much more than the federal level in many ways, because if we have the latitude to do it, we can make a significant difference, and we can do things that are sort of maybe build a parallel future, that when crises come, there are examples of what has been done right that can be adopted quickly.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you. Thank you, Dave. Thanks, John, for the great question and dialogue there. I think we're about out of time. And I just, once again, I want to congratulate CACOR for the 50th anniversary, and then turn it over to Ted Manning.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Gotta get started. Here we go. Is it going to let me on? Yes, it is. Good. Well, Dave, that was terrific. I biased because I was the head of land use planning for Canada for many years, and also the director of sustainable development in our environment department for a long time. And you are taking head on almost all of the same problems I was stuck with. And it sounds like you're doing a very good job. Say a couple of things. While I was there, we started something called the Success Stories Bank, because we discovered that real success was integrated and often at a very small scale. And therefore, we were compiling what worked very much as you are and providing examples to people who are as similar as as we could find to make them use it. Unfortunately, as you have noticed, governments change, and the government that allowed us to do that is not there anymore. But then that happens. And so we're always operating in a very political sphere when we're trying to change environmental attitudes. There's one other thing before I quit for a second. We've been doing something through the Club of Rome, focusing on values and well-being. And you noted very much that there are a lot of values beyond economic ones, that the notion of growth only reflects a very few of them. And we do have a program going on now through the Club of Rome and with other clubs of Rome around the world to try and promote the idea of having a better way of using values, metrics, and creating the indicators that would allow people to see what's really important. That's not finished, that's new, but it might help. Anyway, thank you very much for giving a very interesting and, quite frankly, very holistic presentation, very much consistent with the values of the Club of Rome and most of our members. So thank you again. And therefore, I will just tie this off with saying that this will be online reasonably soon. It will be, we will ask people, please, when you visit the site, please link in. If you use the YouTube, please sign in and say that you like it, because that lets us continue to do these kinds of things and bring in the very good people we've been lucky enough to get to talk to us. So thank you again, Dave, and we could certainly like to talk to you again at some point in the future.
I would love that. It's been a great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
Thank you.